The War Within Season 1 for Mythic Plus is a bit of a mixed bag. There's a lot of good changes here, and I've been enjoying myself, but there's also a lot of stuff that isn't really working for everyone, and some larger issues that might not be easy to address. This is the critique. I'm going to have some feedback, some positive, some negatives. We'll start with the positive, then we'll move into those negatives in the later half of the video. Hey, if you like healing content or just listen to me rant about World of Warcraft, get subscribed. You know I appreciate you. And if you want to watch me live, the Bows of the Healer, all one word, on twitch.tv. So my first positive feedback is that I actually really like the dungeon pool. I know that there's still some tuning to be made, and it's not necessarily the perfect dungeon pool, but in terms of themes, target counts, different styles of bosses, and dungeon layouts, I'm actually really happy with this season. If I kind of remove some of the things from the dungeons that are frustrating right now, I actually really like the mix that we get. I don't like that there's a City of Threads and a City of Echoes in the same season, but that's just a naming convention. I'm fine with both the dungeons. Like, Dawnbreaker is an absolute mess, but I love the dungeon. Siege of Borealis and Necrotic Wake are both dungeons that you have to learn all those technical little details. They're not so bad once you do, but good lord are they hard with pugs. And then you have places like Mists of Tyr and Scythe, which bring me great joy, but there are so many mistakes you can make there. I'm happy that the dungeons you can really get into and get really good at. There's a lot to learn, but I also wonder if maybe it's a little too much for the average player, especially because I have an advantage in that I did get to play in the beta. One of the changes in the War Within was to healing, and the health bars got a little bit bigger and healing didn't get adjusted to too much. This means that you do have to heal more in general, but the incoming damage profile of Mythic Plus tends to be on the slightly heavy side, but not too heavy. This means that healers in fact do have to heal. We'll still find openings to do damage and crowd control and help out, but it doesn't feel very overwhelming. But if players aren't kicking or doing things correctly, yeah, there ends up becoming an excessive amount of damage that's very, very hard to heal. And of course, anything that scales to infinity will eventually one-shot you, so if your gear score is on the lower side, you're pushing some high keystones, you're gonna start falling over. That's just inevitable. But asking players to learn the dungeons and play a little bit more clean isn't inherently a bad thing. I have some critique on this matter, but to start on the positive side of it, from a gameplay perspective, if you're making players be more responsible for their own health bars, you will eventually shift blame away from just healers. A bad healer will still let the party die, but that'll happen on normal damage. But if the party is taking too much extra damage from mechanics or standing in swirlies or whatever it is, then that's going to end up putting the blame more on people making mistakes. You want to make sure that players are responsible for their own play. So if you give the healers too much power to heal those kinds of things, people will just blame the healer instead of getting better. If you put too much on the mechanics, then playing perfectly is more important than doing anything else your role does, and that could become a little too puzzle-like and maybe not what people are looking for in World of Warcraft. I really like these changes, and it makes the balance feel good. Even if the dungeon tuning isn't necessarily always there, and the community isn't necessarily always good enough for these changes, I do think it's a good direction. I'm also a big fan of the tanking changes. Yes, tanking did get a little bit harder, and as a healer, you have to think about your tank just a little bit more. But one of the benefits to that is I can really tell the skill of a tank. Even some of the best tanks in this game right now, like Guardian Druids, are fantastic, still have their health bar fluctuate, they still have to play their defensives correctly, and I find that to be pretty satisfying as a player. I'm happy that I can see the skill expression of my tanks. I know it doesn't make keys any easier, and that's not necessarily good from a pugging standpoint, and again, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I find that having to interact with my tank and work with them a little bit more closely is actually really engaging, and I like the changes. But also at lower levels of play, tanks can still be self-sufficient if they're good at the game, so it's a bit of a win-win. I think these are good changes to the tanks, and if maybe they were 10 to 15% better at keeping themselves alive, I would say it's perfect. Just a little something for every tank. I think that'd be great. I also really like the difficulty curve. I'll talk about keystones in a second, but just straight up from a difficulty perspective, I like that Heroic is Season 1 dungeon pool so that players can start practicing at a pretty approachable level. M0's being difficult but having no timer and no affixes is also great for learning. A daily lockout also means it's good for getting gear. And I like that the Keystone levels just also have a nice curve to them. A 2 and a 3 don't have the Fortified or Tyrannical affix, just the current seasonal Xal'atath affix. I like that after 4 you get Fortified or Tyrannical, so you can start feeling out the more difficult affixes. Challenger's Peril, which I do have some issues with, starting at where hero gear comes in at a 7, feels pretty good as well. And then of course 10. tyrannical and fortified, it's the perfect little skill gap to kind of say, okay, you've done your 9s, you've done these dungeons, now let's see if you can handle both affixes at the same time. It's a really nice little final leap into higher level play. And then of course you have 12s where they just turn off the Xal'atath affix and it's all just difficult gameplay. This is going to make running tournaments easier. This is going to make playing with friends easier. I don't know. I really like these changes. And as we get gear score and Mythic Plus becomes naturally a little bit easier, I think a lot of people will genuinely be enjoying these changes. Also, as an aside, delves are a fantastic place to learn. I've been kind of using them like a training mode. Not only can you get gear from them, and not only are they very good scalable content, but it just gives you a dungeon-like experience with many different kinds of enemy types in a risk-free environment. You can just test things. I've been learning Frost Mage, and I'm not particularly good at it yet, and it's also not particularly hard, but I still wanted to know where my moves go and what kind of mistakes I could make so that I had a better understanding so that when I went into Mythic Plus, I felt a little less stupid about what I was doing. On to the critiques, and to start things off, Mythic Gear. I don't really have a problem with the new item level differences or the gear gap of Season 1, but Mythic Gear acquisition feels a little rough. The only way for a Mythic Plus player to get Mythic Gear is the Great Vault right now, or to go do Mythic Raid, and I don't feel like that's very fair to Mythic Plus players. Conversely, I know raiders that don't really want to spam Mythic Plus for a best in slot ring or something like that. I wish that there were more upgrade options for players that wish to stay in their singular form of content. In fact, for Mythic Plus, it might be nice to just have a scaler. When you get into plus 10s or higher, your gear automatically becomes Mythic, or maybe fully upgraded hero gear turns into Mythic gear that's fully upgraded. I think that could be kind of cool. Or some kind of token exchange system so we can buy Mythic versions of pieces. A catalyst charge system that lets us convert a fully upgraded hero piece into a Mythic piece that then needs to be upgraded. Something like that I think would do wonders for the game. It feels kind of bad that as a Mythic Plus player you can't get Mythic Trag gear. And I know in other seasons, Mythic Plus players were eating, but raiders were struggling to get geared, and they didn't necessarily want to spam Mythic Plus. So I'd like to find a balance here because that kind of friction I think sucks for players who don't like doing both. And while I'm talking about gearing, I do wish that we got more crests as the season went on, and I do wish that Valor Stones, we just got like 15-20% more of them. I feel like I'm constantly out of Valor Stones trying to upgrade things and upgrade my alternate gear for maybe when I'm playing Augmentation or Devastation. I don't know, it's just a little frustrating. Figure I'd throw it out there. Next up on my critique list is Challenger's Peril. I don't like this affix. I don't mind people making mistakes, and I also don't mind that we get punished for mistakes, but 15 seconds feels brutal. Like, maybe just take 5 seconds off it. Maybe make it scaled. Maybe make it so that your first 5 deaths are free. Then it starts being like 20 seconds or something like that. I'm not sure how the dev team wants to handle it. I just feel like Challenger's Peril is just a little too much. I don't really mind it in like a 10 or a 12 where like you're expected to play a lot better and a lot cleaner. But it is a little frightening how often I see a 7 die immediately because a bunch of players who are still kind of new to the keys make some mistakes, die, and now the key is untimable. That's a little much. Okay, this next critique starts with a positive feedback. Dungeon tuning. I'm happy to see such aggressive dungeon tuning. Sometimes these dungeon changes take too long, and while there was a beta and there was feedback during the beta, I'm happy to see that so many things are changing, especially visuals. Making some of the harder to see visuals more clear is something that I'm really happy the WoW team's doing more of. So more of that, please, I love it. However, when it comes to balance changes, I get a little frustrated because it feels like, yeah, we're not balancing too much because we don't want to hurt the race to world first, but have you seen Preservation Evoker's healing? It's not broken in dungeons, but my goodness, is Flameshaper broken in raids. But also, if you nerf it too hard in raids, you're going to hurt the dungeon experience. And I just wish there was more communication and more smaller changes to make other specs better. I would just like to see some more even playing ground. I don't necessarily think you got to nerf everything. I think buffing usually turns out to be a little bit more fun for the players. But even the Overwatch team inside of Blizzard has a great job with their patch notes. They have explanations as to why things are changing and what they're doing, and they talk about their goals. They don't always hit, right? Some of the changes aren't necessarily always perfect, but I love that communication because it lets me as a player better understand what they're trying to do, and then when I provide my feedback, it's then more constructive. I just want more communication from the dev team, because every time I talk to the dev team, they're like some of the coolest people on the planet. So I would just love to have more communication between the balancing department and the various forms of gameplay. And this goes for raiding, PvP, and Mythic Plus. I would just like to see that change. I have 2 critiques about pugging, but let's start with the shorter one. I don't think Keystone should go down a level. I know a lot of people feel this way, but I think it's a little like of an older era of World of Warcraft. Players want gear, players want score. When you go to run a Keystone, your own Keystone, you're hoping that the pugs that you bring in are good at the game. If they're not good at the game, you are punished by no longer being able to get the score or the gear you might have been looking for, or whatever it is. You might be lucky, right? Maybe you fail the key, you walk out and you're okay with running the 10 instead of the 11 or something like that. But that's not necessarily a really fun way to make a system work. Maybe if our Keystones turned off if they failed, and we have to complete another run or a heroic or an M0 or something to help power it back on, I think that could be cool. But as it currently stands, you're putting so much pressure on players to play perfect, to pick perfect compositions or whatever they think they need, and whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. It still ends up on being a needless amount of pressure. I don't even think that Challenger's Peril is much of a problem if the Keystone level doesn't go down when you fail. My final critique at pugging is really a problem with the game. I know I just praised the difficulty curve, and I really think it's a good difficulty curve, but there's no tutorial in this game for Mythic Plus. Yes, there's follower dungeons, but there's no tutorial about the basic things that a player needs to know performing Mythic Plus. Now, will I make that video? Probably. That actually sounds like something I'd be really good at. But I do think one of the biggest issues with pugs is that when you get it to +10 and your paladin isn't pressing their interrupt once, even though they're talented into it, or the priest that didn't bring silence, that always concerns me. On the one end, maybe we could be given our kicks and interrupts, crowd control, and dispels for free whenever we're in Mythic Plus. That could be a really nice change. But on the other hand, if there's nothing in the game that's telling people how to deal with these things on like a basic level, I feel like that's a bit of a miss. A new player will want a guide. And if the guide is up to date and modern enough that if they're trying to get into harder content, it'll actually give them sort of a leg up on how to handle it, that would only benefit the entire player base. And yeah, would I kill for a driver's license style proving grounds, gold, silver, bronze testing area where a player can show me, yeah, Bowser, I got diamond on the driver's license test, bring me into your dungeon. Yeah, I think I would like that, but I know not everyone might be into something that's like a driver's license test in order to do Mythic Plus, but I would like to see some things implemented in helping players learn and also giving players a place to experiment and try those features. The game's got a big competitive future in front of it. This is competitive endgame content. To not have anything that helps direct a player into that competitive content a little bit more nicely is, I think, a bit of a miss. I'll maybe work on that video, but it's something I just needed to get out there because one of these things is not helping, and I would like to see more players get into Mythic Plus and understand how the mechanics work so that they can have more fun and pugs can be a little bit more enjoyable. That being said, there's only so much you can do, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. That's all of it. I aired it all out. I'm probably going to make that tutorial. And of course, if you're a preservation player, I got a beginner's Chrono Warden guide and an advanced Flame Shaper guide in the works for you for Mythic Plus. Take care, friends. I will see you all soon.